We have learned that mindfulness can be present in everything we do, and it is a practice with ourselves and with others, very moving and very meaningful. I'm so happy to have you all back. We look forward to continued excellent discussion. And first, let's again invite the bell.
So, dear friends, can everyone hear me clearly? Wonderful. Did everyone enjoy lunch as much as I did as well? I feel very nourished physically by the foods we eat, but also through the wonderful talks that I've heard so far. So we can continue this afternoon session by first establishing ourselves in the present moment, to be present for what is to come. So we can close our eyes for a moment if you feel comfortable, or leave them half open. We can get in touch with our body, with our breath going in, and our breath going out again. You can sit up tall but relaxed. Have a gentle smile on your face. Relax your shoulders. And feel the weight of your body sitting on this chair, supported by Mother Earth. I breathe in and I feel my abdomen rising. I breathe out and I feel my abdomen falling. I'm aware of my body, releasing, relaxing any tension that I may hold. As I listen to 3 sounds of the bell. I listen. This wonderful sound brings me back to my true home. We can gently open our eyes again, and while we are listening to the next speakers, try to maintain this awareness of our breathing, of our body. And anytime you feel tension, just release, relax.
As we begin to turn now to discussions of integrating mindfulness in public health research and practice, we have the opportunity to hear first through video recording from Dr. Donald Berwick. Dr. Berwick, familiar to all of us in the Harvard community, is one of the leading figures for public health and for advances in the quality of health care. Here, Don Berwick.
Well, Hello, my friends. I so wish I could be with you at this marvelous symposium. I'm envious that you get to spend the day there. I have previous commitments, frankly, with my family, my two oldest sons, and while you're hearing me, I'm on our bicycles in southern Italy, something we'd arranged a long time ago. So I'm sorry I can't be with you. And I do look forward to establishing and maintaining close connections with this marvelous endeavor. And one shout out to the force of nature, Lillian Chung, whose vision is really being manifest in this terrific work. So I have on the wall of my home office one of the many wonderful calligraphic drawings of Thich Nhat Hanh. This drawing says simply, "You have enough." I glance at it often to remind myself of two of its many meanings. First, that I have in my life plenty enough to be happy if my thinking is right. And second, that I have access to resources to help address the inevitable forms of suffering that I, like all beings, encounter. You have enough. This is a time of great stress in American healthcare, with staff increasingly demoralized and in short supply, costs out of control, patients and clinicians worry that they cannot focus on what truly matters, and greater and greater pressures on productivity, compromising the time and the space that human beings need to meet and to help each other. To explore and to act on a much more expansive view of the actual social determinants of health seems somehow unrealistic at a time like this with so much stress, when just getting through the day is difficult enough for the healthcare system. But the science leaves us no logical alternative. If we wish to be healthy, if that's the mission we pursue, we will need to nurture the circumstances that lead to health. Healthcare does not generally produce health. How well we thrive depends far more on the circumstances under which we are born, develop, work, play, and age. The scientific support for that assertion is beyond doubt. In his brilliant book called The Health Gap in 2015, Sir Michael Marmot classifies and summarizes these influences in 5 categories. These explain the wide variation in health, vitality, and life expectancy among nations, within nations, and even from neighborhood to neighborhood. Here are the 5. The first is the experiences of early childhood, especially the extent and degree of stress on young children. Second, the performance of educational systems. Not just the best of the educational system, but the overall access to education at the highest possible quality for everyone. A third is workplace conditions. These include not just income levels, although those matter, but also worker rights, safety, and meaningfulness in work. The fourth category from Sir Michael is the conditions of aging, especially the avoidance of isolation and loneliness for aging people. And fifth, community resilience, including, for example, food security, transportation security, housing security, recreational opportunities, the management of violence in the criminal justice system, and the physical environment. In these 5 causes of variation in health, Professor Marmot finds a great deal of the explanation for why, from nation to nation, region to region, neighborhood to neighborhood, our health varies. But Professor Marmot asks a deeper question about the variation in these causes themselves. He asks, why do nations and communities and regions vary so much in their levels of investment in improving these causal systems of health? Why, even among the wealthiest nations on Earth, are there such wide differences in commitments to supports for children, the quality and fairness of education systems, workplace supports, aging policies, and community infrastructures? We know what makes health. So why don't we all invest in health production. Marmot's answer is a sixth category of causation. He actually calls it the cause of the causes, and he labels it fairness. By fairness, he means a sense of solidarity, mutual responsibility, a concern for each other that infuses political choices, social investments, and government policies, or fails to infuse them. When we care for and about each other, Marmot asserts, we invest in what makes us healthy as a society. When we separate ourselves too thoroughly into islands, tribes, races, and social strata, then we invest less in health itself. When we divide the world into us and them, health suffers. The United States scores low, very low, on health among wealthy nations. We're often at the bottom of rating schemes among wealthy nations, and our performance on the social influences on health is correspondingly relatively poor. We have not, in general, found in our country the will for solidarity and mutual caring that deeply infuses cultures and social contracts in many healthier nations. We will not be substantially healthier unless and until we do. It's not too difficult to describe the commitments and investments that would reflect that commitment in health. I have called them moral determinants of health. If we instantiate moral determinants of health, we will be healthier. These would include, for example, joining in existing and future United Nations conventions that assert human rights, such as the rights of children, the rights of migrants, the rights of women. The United States has failed to ratify these and other important conventions. We stand alone, nearly alone, among wealthy nations in that. We would need to assert and ensure health care as a universal human right, although it does not generate health at the level we're talking about. It is and ought to be a human right. We would become a leader in prevention and mitigation of climate change, which, as you know, the World Health Organization has now declared to be the most significant single threat to human health on the planet. We would eliminate housing insecurity and food insecurity for everyone in our nation. We would transform our badly broken, punitive criminal justice system into a restorative and healing system. We would end policies of exclusion and achieving compassionate immigration reform, and we would protect democracy. We would restore order, dignity, and equity to U.S. governmental institutions, and we would assure the right to vote for everyone. Where could the United States or any nation find the will for such moral commitment as foundational to public and private action? Buddhism, and particularly the teachings of Thich Nhat Hanh, may seem a far cry, a long distance from the pursuit of health for a nation, but they are not. They are, in fact, among the best guides that we have available. It is a paradox that Buddhism can teach simultaneously that suffering is inevitable, that change is constant, and that peace is available. Another of Thich Nhat Hanh's drawings, wonderful calligraphic drawings, says, "Happiness is available. Help yourself." How can well-being be forged from such a mess? Well, Thich Nhat Hanh counsels no mud, no lotus. What is the path to the lotus? This is, of course, a question that's addressed by millennia of teachers and scholars. No good answer is simple or complete, but one core message central to Buddhist beliefs is that everything is connected to everything else. The sense of personal identity is an illusion. The conviction of separateness among people, among living things, even among the inanimate objects of the universe, it misleads us. It creates a belief in a win-lose world, in a potentially win-win universe. You have enough means that connected, we can help each other, not just ourselves. The sense of unity that underlies the philosophical quest of Thich Nhat Hanh and other great sages sounds a lot to me like the fairness that Sir Michael Marmot believes may be the cause of the causes of health, the foundation for the pursuit of improvement of the conditions that actually generate health. I think unless and until we rediscover that we are deeply one, we will continue to have difficulty investing in what can best help us all be well and stay well. We will see the mud, but we will not find the lotus. This oneness, which is so much at the foundation of Thich Nhat Hanh's teaching, is what puts the public in public health. The science is clear. What is cloudy is our vision of the true nature of a world full of suffering, ever-changing, single, and interdependent, whether we admit it or not. Thank you very much, my friends. I look forward to further work with you in this important endeavor.
I hope Don can feel it from here. I feel him from wherever he is, and re-inspired, as always, by his words. We now have the opportunity to hear from the speakers in our next panel. We have 4 individuals who will share their thoughts with us. In order, they will be Dr. Ivan Perry, Dr. Vinh Tho, Dr. Ryan Niemieic, and Sister True Dedication. We look forward to hearing each of your comments and welcome you to today's program. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I am very grateful to Walter and to Lillian and the organising group for the kind invitation to participate in this inaugural seminar and launch celebration of the Thich Nhat Hanh Center for Mindfulness in public health. I am delighted and deeply honoured to have this time to reflect on the opportunities and challenges of integrating mindfulness in public health research and practice. I have recently stepped down as Dean of the School of Public Health at University College Cork. The primary focus of my work over 3 decades has been on cardiovascular disease, epidemiology, public health, nutrition, and on capacity building in public health in Ireland. I've had a meditation practice for well over a decade. Like most people, I was drawn to meditation by the uncertainty and vicissitudes of life. I also harboured what might be best to describe as the curative fantasy that meditation would help with my lifelong stammer. In this article on Zen in the art of fluency, I reflect on my experience of disfluency and meditation, on the gradual realization that meditation is a way of life in which we learn to notice, reverence, and accept the experience of each moment. This practice has influenced my perspective on mindfulness in public health. In this short reflection on mindfulness and public health, I will suggest that while mindfulness as a secular practice or mental technique has much to contribute to the promotion of mental and physical health, well-being and resilience at the individual level, unfortunately its impact to date at the population or collective level is barely perceptible. As we face ecological catastrophe linked to the climate emergency and related threats to planetary health and sustainability, we need radical population or system level interventions operating at multiple levels of society. We need to understand how public health can work with others across all sectors of society to draw on the deeper spiritual hinterland of mindfulness, to embrace the challenge of awakening to the stark reality of our interdependence, interconnectedness and interbeing. This enormous challenge is the core issue we face in our efforts to integrate mindfulness in public health research and practice. Public health, in its essence, is about creating and sustaining the conditions for a healthy society. It is both an academic discipline operating at the intersection between biology, behaviour and the environment, and a broadly based movement focused on protecting and promoting the health and well-being of populations at local, national and global level. In reflecting on the issue of mindfulness in public health research and practice, we need to reflect on the major determinants of health and well-being, which operate primarily at the societal level. In particular, we need to acknowledge the limits of human agency as a determinant of health and address the dominant role of national and global macroeconomic, cultural, commercial and political forces contributing to poverty, social injustice, discrimination and oppression. In an excellent review of the scientific and scholarly literature on mindfulness and global public health published in February of this year, Doug Oman from the School of Public Health at Berkeley addresses existing and potential synergies and tensions between the modern mindfulness movement and global public health across 14 dimensions or axes of comparison. There are important areas of synergy between mindfulness and public health, including an orientation towards prevention and resilience, and a recognition of the importance of psychosocial stress and mental health. However, there are areas of tension or poor alignment where the modern mindfulness movement lags public health, including the overall quality of the evidence base for mindfulness in intervention, the level of concern for equity, openness to cultural and religious adaptation, and a focus on interventions targeting causal pathways at both individual and collective levels. The latter issue, the challenge of developing effective interventions on causal pathways at both individual and collective levels, is of particular importance. In a classic paper published in 1985, Sick Individuals and Sick Populations, the British epidemiologist Geoffrey Rose highlighted the critical distinction between the causes of illness at the individual level, the causes of cases, and at the population level, the causes of incidence, and the corresponding distinction between high-risk prevention strategies that target individuals and often rely on high levels of personal agency versus more radical population level strategies that operate at the collective level and are designed to shift the entire distribution of risk in the population to a lower level through systemic interventions at multiple levels of society. In public health, we understand that the impact of individual level intervention strategies is generally limited and temporary in the absence of complementary population level strategies. However, the modern mindfulness movement remains heavily focused on individual level strategies. On a more positive note, however, the empirical evidence for the efficacy of individual level mindfulness-based interventions across a range of clinical indications and population groups is both substantial and impressive, albeit with some concerns in relation to heterogeneity in effect size estimates and publication bias, and ongoing challenges in relation to training and standardization in the development and scaling of mindfulness interventions. For some indications, as we've heard this morning, such as the prevention of relapse in patients with depression, the use of mindfulness-based cognitive therapy has become the standard of care. As highlighted above, the impact of mindfulness at the population or collective level is less evident. While we now have mindfulness-based interventions in diverse settings, including the business and commercial sector, schools, hospitals, and prisons, the efficacy and effectiveness of these interventions is poorly documented, reflecting the challenges of conducting rigorous controlled trials in complex institutional settings. There is also a paucity of multi-level interventions with potential to address the broader organisational context or culture that imperils health and well-being. For example, a mindfulness intervention in the workplace that does not address cultural and work and environment issues such as workload, bullying, harassment, discrimination and role ambiguity is unlikely to be effective. We also need to consider to what extent our mindfulness interventions sustaining as opposed to challenging, unjust and oppressive systems. In striving for a balance between applications of mindfulness focused on caring for individuals and those addressing the underlying societal determinants of health, I think that we can learn from the life and teaching of Thich Nhat Hanh. For Thich Nhat, there was no tension, but rather a synergy between the notion of mindful individuals and mindful communities or populations. He combined rigorous training and dedicated practice in meditation and mindfulness and the development of radical insight into the nature of reality at the individual level, with extraordinary actions for peace and social justice at the community level through work on mindful leadership, mindful communication, communities of mindful living, and other manifestations of engaged Buddhism. We can also learn from other contemplatives, such as the American Christian writer and mystic Father Richard Rohr, who established the Center for Action and Contemplation in Albuquerque, New Mexico in 1987. A centre focused on working towards a more loving, just and compassionate world. This, of course, is an enormously challenging agenda for public health, grounded as it is in the Enlightenment values of objective science, rationality, and the separation of church and state, or in contemporary language, the separation of the spiritual from the secular. Consider the issue of climate change. Despite 3 decades of political efforts and a wealth of research on the causes and catastrophic impacts of climate change, global carbon dioxide emissions have continued to rise and are 60% higher today than they were in 1990. It is clear that science, reason, and the traditional tools and strategies of public health advocacy will not be enough to move hearts and minds to successfully engage with the climate crisis and related problems that imperil health, well-being and sustainability in the 21st century. Public health needs to be the catalyst at the forefront of a movement that seeks to celebrate and acknowledge the beauty and fragility of our planet and cultivate a popular narrative and moral consensus focused on justice, compassion, interconnectedness, and interdependence within and across generations and with all life on Earth. That this is a daunting agenda, but one that I would suggest is appropriate for the Thich Nhat Hanh Center for Mindfulness in Public Health. Thank you.
Although my father was Vietnamese, I grew up abroad, and I first came to Vietnam in 1982. It was a short time after the end of the war that ended in 1975 of the American War. And the experience of the situation of the children after the war really was something that touched me very deeply. I was working at that time in the field of special education and inclusion. And so that was the starting point of our engagement in Vietnam to try to contribute to the well-being of these children. And so the beginning of our work in Vietnam was in the field of special education and inclusion, and that was a blessing because it helped us to create a relationship of trust with the authorities, because special education is not perceived as being threatening to authorities. And so the beginning of our work was really focused on special education, and it really culminated in 2009 in the creation of the Peaceful Bamboo Family, a mindfulness-based community that is actually located 10 minutes walk from Tehiu, Thai's root temple. But when we bought the land, we were not aware of it, believe it or not. First we bought the land, and then I found out, oh, it's just across the road. So that was one of those, auspicious coincidences where the universe is somehow showing us the way. And this work for many years in the field of special education, it made it possible to gradually and very carefully expand the scope of our work. That included vocational training, but also a lot of working with nature. So we were the first biodynamic agricultural center in Vietnam, and we were some of the pioneers in this field. Now, it was actually the authorities that asked us, because they saw what we were doing in the field of special education, can you do something with the overall educational system? Because, as I show here, on one hand, in the PISA, it's the Program for International Student Assessment that is conducted by the OECD worldwide. Vietnam is actually ranking pretty high in certain fields like science, but most of the Southeast Asian nations rank high, like Singapore, Hong Kong, Japan, South Korea, parts of China, and so on. So academically, but the well-being of the students and the young people doesn't match. And it was this mismatch that brought the UNESCO to write a first report in 2016 called Happy Schools. We're trying to figure out what would be the determinants that would create such an environment that would not only enable young people to achieve academic performance, which of course we want to achieve, but also a certain level of happiness and well-being. And so that was really the beginning of the work where the authorities, it was the Provincial Department of Education and Training, asked us if we were willing to engage in such a program. And so in the meantime, I had been hired by the government of Bhutan to be the program director of the Gross National Happiness Center in Bhutan. It was parallel working. It was parallel tracks. We were working in Vietnam and in Bhutan. And I don't know if I guess some of you are familiar with the idea of gross national happiness, but what I want to emphasize is that in the perspective of gross national happiness, when we speak of happiness, we don't speak of superficial pleasure. It's not a hedonistic kind of approach. It's something much deeper. And we try to summarize, what we understand by happiness, and that was also what the government of Bhutan presented at the General Assembly of the United Nations in 2011, happiness and well-being as a new development paradigm. And so the question is, what do you mean by happiness? It's something so subjective, so culturally constructed, so different. And so we sort of summarized all the research that had been done in this field by saying there's three main components. One is living in harmony with and knowing how to care for ourselves. That's like the foundation. That's where mindfulness really comes in as a foundation. But it's not all. We also need to know how to live in harmony with and care for others, for society. And we've heard a lot about that today. And obviously, in the Buddhist perspective, happiness is not just something individual, personal. It's my happiness is interdependent with the happiness of all other life forms and, of course, all other people. And thirdly, and we've just heard so much about it just before and during the day, in the situation in which we live, there will be no happiness if we don't learn how to live in harmony with and care for our beautiful and fragile planet. So that's sort of the framework of the Happy School. And so the Happy School, we started it 5 years ago. There's a story before that because we were working with the Mind and Life Institute on a program called A Call to Care. And so that's kind of a follow-up of that original program. And so it's a teacher training program that goes, it's like a year long in 3 modules. And the province of Hue, which is the province where the root temple is, asked us to conduct a pilot project with 9 schools. And we did it under the supervision of the University of Hue, who was doing a third-party assessment, and also with 2 universities in Switzerland, medical schools in Geneva and medical school in Lausanne. And so we try to sort of operationalize this concept of happiness as self-care, care for others, and care for nature in the form of a program. And the idea was to empower the teachers so that they would be the one implementing it in the classroom. So we didn't come with a ready-made program for the classrooms, but it was really empowering the teacher so that they could embody and role model these qualities and then pass it on to their students. And our pedagogical approach was something quite classical, bringing head, heart, and hand in harmony. These are the workbooks that we created. So one part was a curriculum that we wrote, and the second part, on the right side, is the workbook that the teacher wrote while applying it at the different levels of, primary school, secondary school, and higher secondary school. And so mindfulness was kind of the basis. And then it was building on mindfulness, going into social emotional learning, care for others, care for nature. And so I'll go quite fast about that because I think these are things that are well known here. And that also where the research we did, the assessment we did from the Hue University and the 2 medical schools confirmed this kind of outcome. But again, it was not like mindfulness alone, it was mindfulness within a context of changing the culture of the school. Because one of the most important determinants is the quality of the relationship between teachers and students, between students and students, between teachers and parents, between the whole educational ecosystem. So that was the focus. And mindfulness was kind of the foundation on which all these improvements in the educational ecosystem was built. So here you have pictures of, we have Happy School in Switzerland, Germany, so that was in Germany, and that's primary school children with their little red scarf, because it's a communist country, so they have practicing mindfulness. And I'm not a neuroscientist, so I was trying to understand how's the action. And so I'm also a father, and that's a research that my daughter has been doing. So I'm a proud father. So my daughter is a researcher at the Geneva Hospital, and she's a pediatrician, and she has been researching the impact of mindfulness-based intervention on children who were born prematurely, and she was following them from early childhood until teenage. And so she did this slide. It's not mine, but it helped me to understand how it worked. So it's all about how mindfulness practices enhances executive functions. But what is executive functions? So I was not that clear. I'm not a neuroscientist. And so she explained it to me in a way that made it understandable. She said, you see, the brain is like an orchestra, because all these different functions have to work together. And executive function is the conductor. And the conductor has to have the working memory. He knows the whole thing, the whole symphony. And he's also the one who shows you have to be more quiet and inhibit something, and then, invite the soloist to play. So that was the kind of image that helped me understand what was the impact of what I was doing. It was my daughter who taught me that. So I'm very proud of that. Yeah. So these very powerful executive function that are strengthened by mindfulness practices. Now, the other aspect was, as I said, that we thought we could not separate mindfulness practice from care for the earth. And so a lot of the work we did was around care for the earth. And we have in all the schools programs with organic gardening and things like that. We just came back a few weeks ago from an international symposium in Hue, where we had Vietnamese and international speakers, and it was the opportunity to sort of show what had happened with these 5 years implementation of Happy Schools, not only in Hue, but now it's spreading in many different provinces. And the Vice Minister of Education was there and said, Happy School is actually the direction in which the educational system of Vietnam should go, which for us was like a big thing. And also quite a challenge, because how do we do that? In Vietnam, it's, population 100 million, more or less 25 million kids in school, or 30 million kids in school, and we're quite a small group, So, but anyway, that was so warm, that was such an encouragement to see that at highest level there was a willingness. Now, what are the next phases? And that's my last slide. Through the symposium, we got a partnership with the OECD. So on one hand, we are now developing the Happy School Online to be able to scale it up, with the problems that were mentioned today about, when you go online, what do you lose and so on. But still, we don't know how else we can scale up. But then the other development that is really interesting is that the director of the PISA study, Dr. Andreas Schleicher, asked us to become a partner to redefine the next PISA indicators. Because until now, PISA has been focusing on math, science, language, that's it. And now he agreed that we need well-being indicators for the future. So that's what we're working on right now to help the OECD develop well-being indicators for the upcoming PISA research. And I feel a bit overwhelmed by that. So if any of you feels that they could contribute, most welcome, come and see me. And the second project that we're working on with the OECD is to contribute to what the OCD calls the learning compass. So defining the competencies towards well-being for 2030. So that's quite amazing, because a little seed that was planted in Hue, not even a major town in Vietnam, in one country, is now flourishing. And it reminds me very much of, I was recently in Hue and I was doing a walking meditation in Hue, and then suddenly I envisioned, Thich Nhat Hanh as a young monk, learning to do walking meditation around the pool, this moon lake or whatever it's called, and that out of that, all that has flourished, that brought us here today. So for me, this is just a continuation of what Thich Nhat Hanh has planted as seeds many decades ago. Thank you very much.
Dear Thai, dear beloved community that is clearly both evolving and here and now. My name is Ryan Niemieic, and I'm part scientist, part practitioner, part educator. And I'm here to share with you about wholesome seeds, or what we can think of as character strengths. That's my work at the VIA Institute on Character, which is a nonprofit organization in Cincinnati, Ohio, that is a leader in advancing the science and practice of these wholesome seeds or character strengths. Now, when I think about Thai and my study and practice of his incredible works in the last 25 years, what has struck me most then and now is all about mindful living. That it matters how we email, how we social media, how we walk, how we speak, how we listen. It all matters. And that it also all matters with the topics that I'm going to be talking about today with these wholesome seeds. Peace, caring for the planet, and interbeing. So when I mention wholesome seeds, I'm talking about character strengths, sort of synonymously here. Also, you can think of them as positive parts of your personality. Qualities that every person on the planet has, as far as we know scientifically. About 20 years ago, a large group of researchers compiled this work of wholesome seeds or character strengths. And this work was the result of several different things. It was cross-cultural. It was reviewing texts on virtues throughout time, dating back to Aristotle. It was a review of what each of the world religions have had to say about what's best in human beings. It was a review of the science from the education field, psychological sciences, social sciences, theology. It was surveying people across the globe, across every continent except for Antarctica. And these 24 strengths were found to be consistent in all those veins. And on the far left side there are the larger categories of which they occupy, the virtue categories. So I won't spend another 10 hours talking to you about the development of this common language or these wholesome seeds. Maybe that's for a conversation if anyone has the stamina for 10 hours. But instead, I'm going to use it as a springboard for the rest of the experience here. But I will say a little bit about the measurement tool. So there's a psychometrically valid measurement tool that's constantly being improved over the last 15 years or so. It's called the VIA survey. It's a free, valid measure that people around the globe have widely taken. It's taken by somebody literally every 10 seconds of every minute of every day. So there's another person that just took it. Another person. 42 languages and so on. So, and from this work, there have been a multitude of practices that have evolved, and entire books written on those practices. Over 900 studies in the last 15 years. So viacharacter.org is the nonprofit organization site and where you can take that measure. So in terms of the three areas I'd like to speak to, let me start with peace. And I think of a Ralph Waldo Emerson quote, and I kind of paraphrase it a little bit. And he said, we may search the world over for peace, although we find it within or we find it not. And so let's start with inner peace. And we'll talk about different levels of peace. And we can think of it inner peace, relationship peace, intra-group peace, inter-group peace, and broader, community, citywide, and so on. But let's start right at the beginning with inner peace and talk about a couple other levels. So in this study of 21,000 people, we published this a year ago, we were looking at the relationship between character strengths and different measures relating to inner peace. And basically what we found is that there were primary strengths and secondary strengths. The primary strengths of hope and gratitude and zest seemed to be most connected with inner peace. And then forgiveness and spirituality, secondary. So this is starting to point to something, that perhaps some of the positive seeds to create inner peace might have a lot to do with an optimistic attitude. It might have a lot to being grateful and appreciative in life. It might have something to do with letting go, which we can think of as forgiveness, a letting go in our mind. It might have something to do with the pursuit of the sacred, which is how scientists most commonly define spirituality. Not that it's just limited to those. Any of these 24 seeds, ingredients, can be pathways for inner peace. But science helps us to kind of group things and understand things better. Now, the two in red there, judgment and kindness, had a negative relationship with inner peace, which we're not fully understanding, but one hypothesis is that too much outward-directed kindness and without a balance towards self-compassion and self-care, or too much judgment, what we think of as critical thinking and logic and analysis, that might have an impact on inner peace. So I want to talk about another level, but let me ask you two questions. When you think of one of your close relationships and nourishing one of those close relationships, which of the seeds, the 24 seeds here, let me go back, is most important for you to nourish the seeds in that one-on-one relationship? Second question, when you think of somebody that you have a political or religious divide with, somebody that you have a lot of tension with, you struggle with, which character strength, which seed is most helpful to nourish and water in order to have a balance with that relationship? So when we asked this of 25,000 people, this is what they said. They were able to choose up to two, and then there was a qualitative analysis studying what people wrote. So we have honesty and love being an important part of relationship peace. And when it comes to managing tensions with somebody, reducing conflict, overwhelmingly the strength chosen was perspective. And perspective means to be able to take that bigger picture, to be able to integrate life experience with the moment, to be able to get in the other person's shoes. That was the most important piece. So you can see this is immediately practical too. I mean, this might be a scientific study, but immediately practical in terms of something we can start using right now. Curiosity was the second most reported strength in terms of being able to take an exploratory approach to the person, to ask questions rather than just assume that your perspective is the correct perspective. Then you can see social intelligence and kindness and fairness, some strength, which are all strengths we've talked about here today a little bit, also an important part. Now let me shift to another topic, caring for the planet. And scientists often look at this in a couple of different ways. Pro-environmental behaviors, so doing positive actions for the environment, like picking up garbage and recycling and composting. And the other way that scientists look at it frequently is your connection with nature. And there are scientists have identified about 5 different core pathways by which we can connect with nature and really have that oneness with Earth. So on the pro-environmental behavior side, when we ask people these different kind of pro-environmental behavior questions, these are the strengths that come up highest. And you can see that appreciation of beauty was the character strength that seemed to matter most for people. So this idea of not going through life with blinders on, this quality of being able to see the beauty in the smallest of things, one little bug that's floating in front of you, or the beauty of somebody's smile. And we probably use that strength a lot today, appreciating the excellence of the different presenters and the different meditations, but also the excellence and beauty of your own experience. But you can see how important that is for caring for the planet. And by the way, not shown here, we have some early studies on nature connection and those nature connection pathways. And again, appreciation of beauty and excellence seems to be most important for every single pathway. Now let me move to the third area, interbeing. And again, I sort of just handpicked these 3 areas because they're 3 of the areas that are quite striking to me in terms of what Ty has talked about and written about that struck me personally. But they're also the areas that are newest and hot off the press. I mean, I could have come up here and talked about character strength in business or in schools or in health or in parenting or in disability populations, and we could talk about hundreds of studies in those. But I'm talking about these are the newest of the new. So new that some aren't even published yet. They're just being designed or just being moving forward. So in terms of interbeing, we think of this as our own interconnection with all of life, plants, minerals, animals. And my colleagues at Columbia University who are leading this study, one of them named Thomas Fryman, who done a lot of deep thinking on interbeing and studied Ty's work. And he went to Blue Cliff Monastery with various items to an interbeing questionnaire and interviewed the monastics. Maybe some of you here a couple of years ago. He asked about each of these questions. Is this a good item? And does this capture what Ty was trying to say? And is this how you see interbeing? And the result of that was and then further scientific analysis to whittle down the items, a 10-item interbeing scale. And here's 2 of the sample items right here. And so when we asked, just in December, 8,000 people questions on interbeing and other kind of measures, along with the VIA survey to measure the 24 strengths, we found these results. So strengths of transcendence and strengths of wisdom seem to be most important for making up interbeing. And so transcendence being those spiritual-oriented strengths that help us connect outside of ourselves. So strengths like hope and gratitude and humor, spirituality, and the wisdom strengths. So these are those cognitive-oriented strengths like creativity and curiosity and critical thinking. So perhaps it's a major blend of spirit and mind in this sense. So I've been talking more about the research. Let me just say something about some of my work on the practical side of things. So about 15 years ago, inspired by Ty's work, inspired by John's work, I created Mindfulness-Based Strengths Practice, which is an 8-week manualized evidence-based program that's used around the world. And it blends the latest science and practice of these positive seeds with the latest science and practice of mindful living and mindfulness. And though in some of the recent studies, it's been shown to be superior to mindfulness alone, which tells us that it seems to be important to really blend in this kind of work with character strengths and who we are and helping others, our children, our students, our employees, our clients, our patients, to understand who they are and bring those qualities out to help them to water their character strength seeds more regularly, and to combine that with the watering energy and passion and excitement of mindfulness. One of the many practices in MBSP is clearly building straight out from Ty's work on Gathas, extensive writings and work that Thai did. So we might pause for a moment and engage in this strength gatha adaptation of Thai's work. So with your eyes open or closed, you might image and pair your breathing with each of these lines that I'll lead you through. Breathing in, I see my strengths. Breathing out, I value my strengths. Inhaling, dwelling now in my strengths. Exhaling, I express myself fully. So opening our eyes if we haven't already, but doing so with mindful intention and seeing ourselves as people of strengths. And to conclude, perhaps we can see, explore, use, encourage these character strengths, these positive, wholesome seeds within us and in the people around us and for our world. And if we do that, it starts one at a time. It leads to the next person, creating a positive ripple to our families, to our groups, to our workplaces, our teams, and our communities. So thank you for your mindful attention.
That's better, I can see you all. Dear respected Thai, dear beloved community, dear friends, it's such an honor to be here and to have a chance to offer some perspectives and reflections as a member of our monastic community on some of the things that we've been hearing today. My first contact with Thai and Sister Chang Kong was a 3-week retreat 21 years ago. And I feel I am still a student, a learner in what mindfulness is. And so one of the thoughts that was arising for me as I was listening to all the presentations this morning is the question that Thai often gave us. Am I sure? Are you sure? Are we sure we know what mindfulness is? It's a first-person laboratory experience. And how can we keep our minds, our hearts, and our perception open as we do this very important research? Are we sure we know what it is that we are trying to measure? For me, mindfulness has been something that has transformed my way of seeing, my way of living, my way of kind of experiencing the world. And I've learned that thanks to living in community, which, by the way, is an accelerator of learning. When we live in community in our Plum Village centers, we're typically living with 40, 50, or 60 other mindfulness practitioners all together. And that feedback, that mirroring, and what we would call that collective energy of mindfulness is also a thing in itself. And it is, we could say, an energy acting on us while we're cultivating our individual practice. So one question also that was coming up for me this morning as I was listening, how can we look into mindfulness, measure mindfulness, understand or research it, but without separating the individual from the collective? And while actually bringing our attention to the power of collective practice. We had a chance to experience that today with the walking, with the mindful eating. And Thai once said that one day they will invent a machine that can measure the quality of collective practice, collective compassion. perhaps one day that can become a reality. And as we explore mindfulness, it's also important, and even myself as I'm speaking, to not make the energy of mindfulness into a thing. As practitioners, it is something that we experience. It's an energy we generate. It's not a kind of thing, a tool, an instrument, something outside of our own direct experience. And I know that must create a headache for the researchers, but I wish just to share that into sort of testimony from the practice community. And we've also heard this morning, and I want to underline this again, and Thich also cautioned very clearly against this in 2014, when he shared that we should not take mindfulness out of the context of the Eightfold Path. We cannot separate mindfulness from concentration and insight. We cannot separate mindfulness from our way of speaking, our way of thinking, our way of acting, our way of cultivating the seeds, our diligence, how we are responding to our habits and tendencies. We cannot separate mindfulness from our livelihood, what we are doing to earn our living in the world. And so for us, we always want to see mindfulness in this broadest possible context. So it's both collective and communal, it's direct personal experience, and it has the ethical dimension of the Eightfold Path. There's an interesting translation that Thich gave in the Eightfold Path for right view, which Thich also said is kind of, what is this right view that we all need to get? What is this right view, which is a result, it is the fruit of our mindfulness and concentration. And that right view is what Thich described as the insight of interbeing. And I feel that the insight of interbeing must surely lie at the heart of the Thich Nhat Hanh Center for Mindfulness, and mindfulness in nutrition, mindfulness in public health, and mindfulness for our world. How can the insight of interbeing be alive in every piece of research, in the framing of every study? And that interbeing, as we know, for those of us who have read Thach's books, which I'm sure is most of you here in the hall, that interbeing is multidimensional, interbeing across space between ourselves and others, ourselves and the planet, interbeing across time with our ancestors and with future generations, interbeing with all the conditions around us. So how can our study somehow allow for these very broad causes and conditions, and to not introduce, if I may, some of the limitations of our paradigms that we are used to here in the West? For example, the dualism that often comes in, and you can read a lot that Thich has written about the dangers of dualism. For example, we think we can study the body without also studying the mind. And so how can that non-duality inform all the research that can be conducted here? Because that is a door for further insight. That is a door of possibility. And I had a Western education, and now I've had 15 years living full-time in the monastery, and I can feel the way in which my own inner paradigm is beginning to shift. I'm able to steadily, and with the help of my monastic siblings, release some of my dualistic thinking and really experience something far deeper. Another way that Thich has described right view or right insight is insight into our suffering. Insight into our suffering. Mindfulness, the role, the intention is to heal and to address suffering. And for us, it is not to optimize productivity, whether it's more money, wealth, fame, success. It is to be able to heal our suffering at the roots. And we haven't had many sharings of personal practice today, but I would just like to share one story of my practice from the monastery because it relates to mindful eating. So this is in honor of Lillian. We have many practices that we have to be able to bring in a deep energy of awareness to our meal times. So our dining halls are a silent environment, and we have different poems, gathas, that we use before we even take our bowl. We bow to the food in gratitude, and we practice mindfulness while we are waiting in line. We call it not waiting, but enjoying breathing and listening to our body to see how hungry we might be when it comes to the buffet, and to see what we will serve. And I really had a deep intention in my monastic life to live leanly on the earth. I would like to have a light imprint on the earth, and I brought that to my practice of mindful eating. And with a lot of diligence and determination and concentration, I followed through the line, and I then found my place, having served at a table, and I sat down in front of among other monastics at the table. And as we experienced also today, we then have a time to wait for others to arrive before we start eating mindfully together. And I had a visceral shock when I looked down at my bowl and I realized I have taken too much food. How did this happen? How did this happen? I practiced my gathas and my poems. I followed my breathing. What happened between the front of the line and this moment that my bowl is now too full? I don't need this much food. And I felt such a sense of failure because of the determination I had brought to my mindfulness practice, and my wish and my deepest aspiration to live leanly. How did this happen? And I don't know where it came from in my consciousness, but I suddenly realized my grandfather. I have a grandfather who I never met, but I met in that moment. My grandfather who died of obesity, who died of being overweight. And I felt so frustrated and angry and ashamed of this grandfather. And then I got in touch with my wish to live leanly, and that is my other grandfather. I have a grandfather who was as thin as a rake, who lived a very simple life, and people joke that he lived like a monk. And in that moment, I was like, my two grandfathers, I felt them like struggling in every cell of my body. And it was excruciating and enlivening, awakening, but I was crying because this struggle, I felt, how can I resolve this struggle of my grandfather's? And that was a deep insight that helped me realize that who we are is not who we think we are. And mindfulness can offer us so much more than we are looking for. I wasn't looking to encounter my two grandfathers that day. I just wanted to eat and live my dream simply. And I really met that struggle, met what was going on deep inside, I guess because of a quality of listening that was able to happen. And another practice that I've brought to my eating is to look deeply into the food, not just through the interbeing of space, but also the interbeing of time. And as many of you know, if you've visited our monasteries, we have oatmeal for breakfast every morning. And I had been doing quite some reading about how modern grains are much softer and sweeter than the grains that our ancestors ate. And so as I was eating my oatmeal mindfully, I was thinking again, not of my two grandfathers, but of many generations. And I realized, I grew up on a farm, I know the labor involved in farm work. And I realized, wow, I wonder how many generations have been able to enjoy oatmeal this sweet. How many harvests, how many cold winters. And I suddenly realized that the oatmeal I can eat today that is this sweet is directly the result of all of that labor, and I can enjoy it now, the fruit of the labors of my ancestors that they could not even enjoy because it was a work in progress over many centuries or many millennia. And that just opened up my whole experience of what my oatmeal is and who I am and what I am enjoying when I wake up to life now, whose life it is I am enjoying. So thank you for indulging me in allowing me to share these little anecdotes for how the insight of Interbeing kind of can open up our experience of what we're doing when we are generating the energy of mindfulness. And these experiences happened in the context of the monastery. And so as we look at research directions, and you've asked us to make some comments and reflections on it, one question is, how can we really study the collective energy of mindful eating? How can we really study the collective energy of mindful walking? I don't think I could have had those deep insights if I wasn't surrounded by my brothers and sisters and another 60 or 80 people practicing silent mindful eating. And how can we have kind of longer form studies so that as these insights arrive over time, we always say the insights ripen in their own time. How can we develop truly long-form studies that can capture the impact of these insights on our lives as we harvest them, as we enjoy these fruits? How does that then affect how we then enjoy our oatmeal or heal the wounds of our grandparents, our ancestors? And I also recall being here in 2013 and the wonderful event we had with the presence of Thai. And what I took away so much from that was Thai's conviction that every learning environment, every hospital or health environment can itself be transformed into a community. So one question also for us all is, how can this Center for Mindfulness in Public Health not just be an administrative function, but a true community of collaborators and practitioners, bringing to the research, to our dialogue, to our interactions, the energy of practice so that we feel like a community of investigation, a community of inquiry, we can say. And finally, I would just like to say, to draw on something that Eric mentioned earlier about the practice of beginning anew. And for us, mindfulness is also a relational practice. And I think that's also an area that has not been researched so broadly. How our quality of speaking and listening in our family settings, in our work settings, in our healing settings, but also I would say in our kind of political settings, how mindfulness can bring a whole new dimension to how we can relate to our way of communicating with one another. And recently in Plum Village, we've been collaborating with Christiana Figueres, who was the convener, if you like, of the Paris Climate Agreement. And we've brought together groups of climate leaders to spend time, if you like, offline and in nature with the energy of mindfulness to start to bridge the divides that are there, even in a movement that we would think would be coherent as the environmental movement, the climate justice movement, we could say. And it has, in the last few years, become a very fractious place. And if any of you are active in that space, you will know what we are referring to. And so in Plum Village, we've had this experiment of bringing together people from the different camps, the young activists, the researchers, the policy makers, the financiers, the carbon offsets people, the decarbonizing technology people, bringing them all into the same room. And we are not allowed, the rule is we're not allowed to talk about our professional work for the first 2 days, 48 hours, no work and no business. And then we transmit the very deep practice of deep listening, mindful, compassionate, deep listening. And we've discovered that our practice of listening is a little bit different than what we might have, for example, in nonviolent communication, because we also introduce the elements of interbeing, that the one who is speaking and the one who is listening, we are profoundly interconnected. And we also introduce the element of impermanence. We don't come in order to stake our claim, to make our case. We come in with an open mind, ready to change our view and ready to be changed by what we hear from others. So for us, mindfulness is truly a force for change in the world. It is not a kind of band-aid to make an unsurvivable world survivable. Mindfulness is not here to make this broken system something that we can handle. It is here for us to be able to be present and wake up to the reality of what is going on and to look deeply into the roots of what is wrong so that together we can find a way out. And there are so many practices that we can have and access and generate and develop in order to do that. And we have great hope in the research and in Lillian and the team here that we will be able to find new solutions for our world that is truly thirsty for this deep and ancient wisdom. Thank you so much for listening.
Sister True Dedication, thank you so much for your comments, for your insight, for sharing with us, and for actually showing us a path forward in ways that many of us, I think, had not contemplated so clearly as you have laid out. Thank you so much for that. I want to also, on behalf of all of us, thank Dr. Niemieic for your presentation. It's striking to see how much around these strengths and interaction with mindfulness come together in the forceful way that you've described. I, for one, look forward very much to reading these most recent papers that you alluded to. We thank you so much. Dr. Vinh Tho, you didn't even mention the work in Bhutan. Barely alluded to this incredible achievement that you helped to engineer and bring about. But what you did describe in the way of education is itself an inspiration for children and adults and parents everywhere, and we thank you so much for sharing that. And I want to also add our thanks, Dr. Perry, to you. Your explanation of the scope of public health and its foundational dependence on the ideas of mindfulness that have been introduced help show us also a path forward, and I think link very beautifully in unexpected ways through the 4 presentations through the end of what we anticipated and heard. So thank you also for being with us. I know that we would all cherish the opportunity to ask and hear more from each of you, but time has again eluded us. Time itself does not seem sufficiently mindful to me as to adhere to our preferred schedule, but we do now want to give everyone an opportunity to take a little break, to open our minds and refresh ourselves to come back. We will reconvene. Can we reconvene at 5 before the hour? Would that be agreeable? We'll just be then 10 minutes behind. And I look forward to seeing you all promptly then at 5 before. Thank you.